Thank you very much for your presence. And I would like to give a general question to all of us from all this work that we have been doing and the experience you have and what we were listening in the previous in the previous presentations that were really extremely interesting. So in your opinion, which of the 9 megatrends which are in the back and we were discussing about, which one do you believe that impact most gender equality, youth inclusion and social inclusion, and which should be addressed the most urgently if possible, because it's so difficult. They are, as David said, they are so interlinked. But if we will have to do some prioritization, please could you tell us your opinion on that? Maybe starting with Professor Fetien Abera. In your opinion, what of the 9 megatrends that were have identified in the publication and the interim report is the one or ones that need to be most urgently addressed to promote inclusion, gender, youth, which is becoming a real problem, and general social inclusion for to go further, to go rapidly in those changes and development that we are looking in agriculture?
From my perspective, almost all 9 of them are relevant, but I have to pick one, and the political instability is one of the major factors which is affecting globally, especially the people living in a very harsh condition, climate change, malnutrition. 70% of war-affected areas are from those less developed countries affected by drought and climate change. And mostly, the primary victims are the women and the youth, because it kills all the economic initiatives, health, and also social. They are completely excluded, especially I've seen myself. I myself are affected by war. I migrated recently to University of California. They hosted me well, because what makes me surprised is being the first and the only female professor in plant breeding to be affected this way. So I have to protect myself and them. But what happened for the poor people? They cannot really protect themselves. And after the peace, what kind of engagements can be initiated by the global partners? I was struck today by the gender-based presentation this morning. Recognition should be given for the marginalized group, to engage them as a knowledge bearer, to increase their visibility. Is there an interest by partners to be re-engaged in those already peace-building processes? Is there any global strategy to protect humanity? Is there any protection for technology access? We need equality and special focus also for women and youth. Early career scientists are really suffering, not only economically, but also suffering on trauma and psychological. No one is remembers them to engage. Engagement is a healing process. So we need technological support, we need humanitarian support, we need also a woman affected by these processes to be remembered, to be included, and a special strategy has to be designed. A special priority has to be given for those areas, because the world is losing a lot of genetic resources, losing a lot of sources of health and nutrition. And the level of increment is even the highest after the Second World War. This affects the investment, the commitment, the passion of researchers. Scientists has been killed when they were on field trip. Agricultural researchers need to travel to farmers. So if there is no security at personal level, how can they operate? How can they engage? How our partners can be engaged with us also? This is a very, should be taken by all donors, by all, decision makers, to purposely engage, to purposely solve the issue, because it affects other countries also. We have a lot of refugees. It becomes a very huge business for that, and it's affecting Europeans, Americans, elsewhere in the world. I really would like also to really.
Sorry, Fetien, but we need to share the time. Thank you much.
Thank you very much.
Could you pass the... Maybe Professor Meinke, could you go with the question?
It's very hard to follow that emotional and really engaging commentary from Fetien. I think you captured the dilemma that we are facing globally incredibly well, and I was quite touched about that. I think what stood out for me in your commentary was the interlinkages between those megatrends, and particularly the increase in political instability and the increased inequality in the world. And one feeds the other, and that's what we're dealing with at the moment. I said in my opening remarks earlier today that the world is changing more rapidly than our institutions' ability to respond. And I think this is incredibly evident at the moment. I urge the CGAR to really focus on their contribution, what they can do well in order to help us in repositioning as quickly as we can in order to ensure the stability of our food system and of our agricultural systems. You've got a lot of skills at your disposal. You have a lot of resources in various centers. You've got the intellectual capability to assist us with that, recognizing that you will only ever make a small contribution. No institution, no individual, no group can really solve those problems, but you can make a contribution to it, a positive contribution by engaging. And that's really my appeal. And in your, whilst you evolve your research portfolio, please take these sorts of points into consideration.
Thank you, Professor. And Suneetha?
Just call me Suneetha, please.
Yes, I call you Suneetha.
No, thank you. Thank you both for your interventions, and David for your presentation as well. The endeavor of agriculture development or any economic development is actually to feed people, to have them as nourished and healthy populations, and also a safe planet as well, that we don't ruin the planet while doing so. So to me, and being a nutritionist, the focus of my megatrend, since I've been asked to choose one, is unsurprisingly on the changing consumption patterns and nutritional related issues. So we know that, I don't want to preach to the choir. Everyone knows the statistics of, quarter of, how many kids are stunted and wasted. But this thing of what we thought 20 years ago, that somehow the nutrition transition, which is reductions in undernutrition, and then going into more chronic diseases, along with economic transformation, hasn't quite worked out as we thought it would in the 1990s even. So what we are seeing is this persistent double burden of malnutrition, where countries are struggling, many countries are struggling to meet to reduce the burden of undernutrition, which is of both children, youth, as well as women. And they're also seeing a rapid increase in diet-related chronic diseases. And this is happening because of the changing consumption patterns. Of course, there are many reasons why nutrition status is how it is, but I'll focus on what's relevant here in terms of agriculture food systems, right? The affordable diets that are sustainable don't exist for most people, right? Over about 2 billion people actually cannot afford healthy, nutritious diets, and they cannot, and it is worsening because of many of these megatrends interacting as well. For example, climate change, for example, rising inequalities, and so on. So the challenge now is to really understand how to reduce the burden of undernutrition with the interventions and policies that are that the CGIAR will undertake. And I understand there are some very important initiatives coming up or are underway, and but also doing that while taking all these megatrends into consideration, and weaving the issues around intersectional inequities, social inclusion, of issues around youth. Again, just reminding that youth are just both men and women and other genders, identified genders as well, which is also a part of this agenda. One of our students got very upset the other day that I said male and female, and why are you not talking about other things? And I just had to be like, well, because LSMS survey did not ask for anything else, but we need to get beyond that, recognizing many people do not want to reveal that, but that's a side thing. So overall, I think I will leave that. I mean, the consumption patterns have to change and have to shift, which means there's a huge role for CGIAR, as you have already recognized and are already acting on, and improving the affordability, access for nutritious diets. But also, you have to do that. The challenge is against this deluge of ultra-processed foods that you see from in many parts of the world, including in the most, you may not find anything, but you will find Coca-Cola and Nestle and all the other local processed foods as well. So that is the biggest challenge that I think we'll have to tackle.
Thank you, Suneetha. Maybe David could close.
So I'll answer the question I want to. So if we think about the megatrends, some of them are having very, very widespread impact across virtually the whole population of the Earth, and some of them are having really specific impacts that are just much more devastating to particular individuals, but maybe not covering as many people. I think it's really important to sort out the priorities and which of those we really should be addressing first. Is it the ones that are most pressing and urgent, and really having substantially massive impacts on individuals and families, or is it the ones that are having maybe more mild impacts on people but affecting everybody that we should be looking at first? Beyond that, I just draw attention to maybe something that's not really a megatrend, but something that's sort of in this interaction between them, in that a lot of these megatrends cause these sort of repeated and escalating crises, and those crises then generate inequality or other negative outcomes that we care about. And if we're simply sort of targeting the negative outcomes, this is going to keep happening. And it's going to keep happening worse and worse and worse. If we can find some of these underlying mechanisms through which these crises create additional inequality or create sexual violence or these other things, maybe we can find better ways to make our populations more resilient to these types of crises that we know are happening. I'll stop.
Okay, and could you, David, say that it's, at the end, it's a type of institutional management that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, so yeah, I guess what I'd say is some of the research that I think this report points to that needs to be done is thinking about the institutions, and not just the agricultural innovations, but the institutions surrounding everything.
Okay, what at least so far we have is that there's no doubt that these topics were really hot, but the institutionality in general is, and it happened also from the previous discussions, that needs to be very well supported for all this type of all these identified megatrends and issues that are going on nowadays in our agriculture and development. Maybe I might ask some questions from the audience. Or comments.
Thank you. I'm Timo Gaasbeek from the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And thank you for this presentation. I think that this is a really important analysis also to feed back into the policy space and the political space. From my own research on conflict in Sri Lanka's war zone, I realized that youth is particularly important because there's a feedback loop. It is not the people who lose their livelihoods who end up mobilized for violence, it's their children. And therefore, if we want to work on avoiding developing large pools of mobilizable youth, a lot of them are very good people, but some end up getting mobilized. The thing is that we need to work on finding things that make a difference for the smallest and the poorest farms. And if we talk about smallholder farmers, but only talk about those who have a surplus so that they can do a business, we are blind to the people who are actually already below subsistence. So perhaps a question if there are ways of finding a way of looking at this diversity among farms and looking at specifically the poorest categories, because I'm afraid they might get excluded from all this inclusion work that ends up looking at the middle group and not the poorest.
Thank you.
Yes, we have one back here.
Thank you. This is about both the mega trends and the implications. So, David, I was a bit. So I'm going to raise 2 points, okay, and you can see if that's a mega trend or not. So one is about increased volatility. So I think that's quite different than it was 5 years ago. Now, of course, it relates to some of the points you laid out, but I think in itself it is a very significant change. And it really has a major impact on how we think about, for example, food policy. So we're no longer thinking about what's the rice price or subsidy level. It's more about resilience to the shocks rather than the level in itself. Second is about, we've seen very significant attempts at the global policy level, I would say, governance level, to deal with it. Think about, I think the most important element is the Food Security Summit in 2021. We have now the version 2.0. And so, but this is translating into the national policy dialogues. And I think it has major implications for our work to be at the country level, to engage in this, to help that, and particularly for bringing a systems approach to this, because that's really what's being embedded there. And then my last point is this is more linked to the gender issue. We know COVID-19 had major gender implications. I mean, it affected women much more than men. There was an economic effect, which hurted the incomes of women more. There was a health effect. Access to health services was more difficult for women. There was a social effect. Schools closed down. Women had to stay home to take care of the kids. And typically, boys went back to school earlier than girls because they had to help in the household with the economic decline, etc., with long-term implications on access to labor markets, etc. And so again, this comes back, I think, the point. So we should be looking very much on solutions to that, policy and institutional solutions to all this. So happy to get your reaction to that.
Thank you very much. We are very short of time. Maybe one of you could just go for direction, and then we may close it.
Sure. So first off, I'll say thank you for the comments, and I think we're going to probably take those back and think them over, specifically your comments about volatility in what's to come. But I think from my point of view, I agree with everything you said, and specifically what you're saying towards the end about creating the sort of institutional ways of overcoming these problems that have popped up, as we saw in COVID, and as I think we would see in any sort of crisis of that nature. I really think there's a lot there that we need to think about systematically, how we can make a system that is more resilient to those types of crises.
Thank you.
Just on the inclusion part, and the gentleman here said, if you're looking at the middle, you would lose the poorest. So to me, that's not inclusion. That's not an inclusive lens to begin with. So unpacking what it means for CGIAR on what you mean by inclusion, whether it's economic inclusion, social inclusion, whatever, and is quite important. For example, for example, refugees do not appear anywhere and their nutritional status, or the second generation of violence that happens in these communities, and the youth and their food and nutrition security. Well, I'm saying it as out of habit, food and nutrition security, but all the other impact areas and the context needs to be as well thought through. So I think there's an agenda there in what exactly do we mean by inclusion. Obviously, gender is a part of that, but beyond that as well. Thank you.
We have one more back here, and then we'll wrap up this session.
Okay, thank you. Holger, my question is actually to you, so you can give your comment.
So you can answer it.
Hi, it's Alyssa Jade from the System Board. Holger, your point about speed is absolutely spot on. From a board perspective, sometimes we find it difficult to rationalize the operational engagement of the organization compared to the speed of what you're saying. I wonder, and would you mind continuing this piece of work that you're doing to look at leapfrogging? For example, ICT, energy and transport sector have shown us immense opportunities with leapfrogging as a strategy as it comes to the close to market implementation. As we are a science organization and we tend to do incremental innovations, although we're definitely looking for more transformational, but our daily business is quite incremental in our innovation because of our thought processes. But just because we are thinking incrementally doesn't mean we have to release incrementally. Could you please do some thinking about the role of leapfrogging? Is that a strategic approach that we could even be considering?
Okay.
Well, thanks very much for the question, Mr. J. I think there is definitely an opportunity there. And I think that the reason why there's an opportunity there is because in the last few years, all countries had to make policy on the run. They got caught out by poly-crisis around the world. Policies had to be done very quickly, implemented very quickly, without the ability to really think about the unintended consequences. I mean, look about COVID subsidies and what that actually did in terms of inflation. Something that we knew in principle, but we've never really experienced it as we are experiencing it now. Now, my point is that an organization like CGAR, a science-based organization, actually has a lot of knowledge about what science can actually contribute to the various policy processes. Leapfrogging might happen if we think about how we can contribute that scientific knowledge, not just to one particular policy area, but across the various policy platforms in a way that provides more coherent policies that have less of those unintended consequences. And I think that's where the CG actually has a real opportunity to do that much better than that has happened in the past. And maybe that goes a little bit towards what you call leapfrogging.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you. I'm sorry because of time, but we're going to close this panel. And thanks to my colleagues from ISDC.